I'm Adam P. Kennedy. Welcome to the Black Experience. In this episode, we're talking about the life and legacy of warrior, statesman, and citizen of the world, Colin Powell. I'm honored to have former U.S. Army General William Kip Ward, the first commander of U.S. Africa Command, and former United States Security Coordinator for Israel and the Palestinian Authority. No, well, thank you for joining me, General Ward. It's always a privilege and an honor to get a chance to talk to you. And I wanted to talk to you about this, very sad moment about the passing of General Colin Powell. And I just wanted to sort of get your thoughts on his legacy as a warrior, statesman, citizen of the world. How well did you know him, sir?
I knew him well enough so that he called me Kip and I called him sir.
That'll work.
Even after I was promoted to 4-star and he had retired, even out of office as a secretary, he was still sir.
Okay, all right. So when do you recall actually knowing about Colin Powell?
Adam, probably in the mid 70s. I was had left the 82nd Airborne Division, where I spent all my lieutenant years, as we've discussed, and had gone to the 2nd Division in Korea as a senior first lieutenant, about to make captain. And when I got to Korea and made captain, I was really graced to be given command of one of the rifle companies, mechanized infantry companies up on the demilitarized zone and the brigade out in the Western Corridor. And at the time, then Lieutenant Colonel Powell commanded a battalion in one of the other brigades. So although I didn't know him, did not meet him, because he was one of, at that time, no more than 4 Black battalion commanders in the 2nd Infantry Division, I knew who he was. And so that's when I first knew that, hey, there's a Black lieutenant colonel commanding an infantry battalion in this division, other than the 2 that I know, who were, one was another infantry battalion commander, and the second was commanding of the CAV squadron of the division. So those were the 3, as I say, commanders that were commanding combat arms battalions in the division. And Colin Powell was one of those 3 there in the 2nd Division. And this was 75 time frame, I would say 1975. And then the next time that we had the opportunity to at least greet each other, again, nothing in depth knowledge-wise, was when I was a student at the Command and General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth. Okay. In 1983, the class of 83. And then Brigadier General Powell came to be the assistant commandant of at the Combined Arms Center at Fort Leavenworth. And so again, introduction, in awe. Again, at that time, I don't know if I've been promoted to major yet. I may have still been a senior captain, but about to become a major. And here with this general that we had a chance to get to know and at least be in his presence, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. You said this was 19...
This was 83.
83, okay.
So from 75, a lieutenant, he's commanding a battalion in Korea in the 2nd Infantry Division. Now we're in the 1983 time frame, and he's a brigadier general as the assistant commandant at the Army Command and General Staff College there at Fort Leavenworth, the Combined Arms Center, CAC. And yeah.
Wait, go ahead, Kip.
No, and so then subsequent to that, I find myself in 1989, probably maybe 1990, in Alaska as I'm commanding my battalion, Lieutenant Colonel Ward, and then 4-star General Colin Powell, who was the Forces Command commander, United States Forces Command, and obviously Alaska, part of Army Forces. He was our ultimate boss. And so he took a trip to Fort Wainwright, Alaska, where my battalion was stationed, for a visit. And he happened to have a friend who was also in the division at the time, who was my assistant division commander, a Brigadier General Sam Ebbison. And so that made that relationship pretty unique because he came to see his friend. The Everson also had a Caribbean background, and I believe the two of them had gone to school together at the City College of New York, or at least some point in time they were together there. So they were friends. And so he came to Alaska for a visit, came out to a training area, observed a live fire that my battalion was conducting. It was cold. He told me it was cold because they're in Fort Wainwright, Alaska, but that was a great visit. And that was probably the first time that he and I were able to have a direct one-on-one type of a conversation. Here he is, the Forces Command commander. I'm one of his battalion commanders in his all forces command. And he certainly took time to talk to me, how things going, what are my objectives, what type of training am I doing, am I being resourced appropriately for my training, et cetera, et cetera. All the things that you would expect a senior commander to be asking of one of his subordinate commanders when it came to the training and readiness of my battalion there in the, at that time, 6th Infantry Division up at Fort Wainwright, Alaska. But that wasn't the last time either, even before becoming a general officer, Adam. Subsequent to that, in 1993, I believe the early part of 1993, and General Powell is still the Forces Command Commander, 4-star general. And now I'm a full colonel commanding my brigade, 2nd Brigade, 10th Mountain Division, deployed to Somalia. And he visited Somalia. He came on a visit to Somalia, and we were there in Somalia with my brigade, the only Army combat formation that was in Somalia at that time. And General Powell came and visited, and naturally with the same type of conversations. How's the mission going? What type of problems are you encountering? Are you achieving success? How are your soldiers? We talked about soldiers a lot because like he was, my focus was also and has always been and was always on my soldiers. So conversation about the mission, soldiers, how are things going? What do you need from me as the Forces Command Commander, et cetera, et cetera. And so that was in 1993, I believe. Don't recall the exact time frame. In fact, quite ironically, as I was looking at one of the network coverages of his death, and one of the program interviews, how the background, the fill-in type of information with respect to what scenes, I happened to see a glimpse where some footage existed that I was not aware of. He had, obviously he had his combat camera people with him, but I wasn't aware of the footage where he and I are walking together. Then a second view where he's addressing my soldiers, and I'm standing just to his left and to his about a step behind to his rear, and now helmets and all those things. I had not seen it. I was not aware of that. In fact, I'm trying to find it and locate it because it's one of the photos that also reflective of my time with my brigade there in Somalia for Operation Restore Hope.
Yes, no, that's fantastic. So how would you describe, he has a legendary reputation in terms of his leadership, and you talked about a couple of instances. How would you regard his leadership, sir?
He's a concerned, caring, wanted to know his people, set an example. Obviously, he's famous for his doctrine as well as his leadership principles with respect to how you conduct yourself, what you do, things that are important about a leader. So for me, the thing that I'm just so mindful of is how personable he was. The fact that when he's addressing you, when you're talking to him, you are the center, you're the focus. And truly the notion that, hey, yeah, I am who I am, but you are who you are. And buddy, you're just as important as I am. And that's something that for me was so important. I also try to have that same type of a piece. Every person in my formation had an import that certainly accorded to the respect for what they did, who they were as a soldier. And he exuded that all over the place. And so he was known for that. Caring about people was his trademark, ensuring that his people were cared for, such that by them being cared for, he knew that they would get the job done. Trusting your subordinates, not being over overly supervising, you're giving them a mission type directives, and then letting them go execute. So there's an element of trust there. Obviously, being honest, integrity, character, all those are things that were just who he was. And I think what endeared so many to him because of that. When he spoke, he was telling you the straight deal, not varnished or fabricated in any way to paint a picture other than what it was. And so, soldiers trusted him, and he was very personal. And he would wade into a crowd, and he would wait right to the soldiers. Hey, how you doing? How things going? You getting enough of what you need? Are you getting your job done? Those sorts of things. He was a soldier in that regard, and many of us, including me, certainly took lessons from that. As they say, we were fed his wisdom, led by his example, and we tried to follow what he set in many regards. So, and again, you didn't have to know him personally to get that. I mean, you could just sense that from who he was as a leader, as a commander, as a leader, as a senior officer, but importantly, as a fellow soldier.
Thank you, Kip. That's fantastic. And I think, would you say, because I know you are a firm believer in that same philosophy, his advancement, is part of that the reason he advanced so quickly and is such a high rate? Would you attribute a good portion of that to his demeanor, his doctrine, his philosophies?
So that's part of it, but he's also a smart guy. I mean, he was also a smart guy. He knew his craft. Yeah. I mean, he understood. He would study the situation, and he would talk about how he's from New York, the Bronx. Went to the City College of New York. Didn't go to West Point. I didn't go to West Point, but I never felt as if that disadvantaged me because I took time to make sure that I did my very best to understand my job, to be the very best at it I could be, whatever it was. And no doubt in my mind, General Powell was the same. And so he knew what he was doing. He would study his mission, the requirement. He would gather from others who were also involved with it information, so that the decisions he made were the best that he could do based on information he was provided. And so he took advantage of those around him to the point that he would cause them to supplement whatever he was bringing to the table. And so he understood that about other people. He could read people, understand that side of it. And so I think he was smart. And so those things, and then just being a master of his craft. He just knew his job. He was a great battalion commander. He commanded his brigade, if you will. When I was in Germany, the very first time, this is after leaving Fort Leavenworth, he happened to come to Germany for a brief time as a corps commander. This is in the 1980, I don't know, maybe 85, 86 timeframe. Didn't stay long because he got plucked out of that position to go back to be the national security advisor, I believe, working for then President Reagan. But at the time, which was really, it hasn't happened since, the United States Army had two Black Corps commanders, General Andy Chambers, who commanded the 7th U.S. Corps, which is the corps that I was in, and then General Colin Powell, both lieutenant generals at the time, commanding the 5th U.S. Corps there in Germany. So we had two African Americans commanding the two forward deployed corps in our Army there in Europe during the Cold War. And so even then, the fact that he was there leaving so quickly, that 5th Corps felt as if they'd been cheated because they knew who he was, and he didn't stay there very long because of the things that we've talked about here, plucked out of that job to go back to be the national security advisor, working for President Reagan. So yes, those things regarding his leadership certainly contributed to his rise, but he was also very, very smart, and he excelled at missions that he was assigned, and he was extremely, extremely capable, and that was seen and recognized by all.
So I'm curious, Kip, if You talk about knowing his craft and how smart he was. Would you say that was on full display during the invasion of Iraq and the liberation of Kuwait, sir?
I think it was certainly, again, he as a chairman had a field commander, Norman Schwarzkopf.
Yes.
And so I talked about how he trusted his subordinates. And so he would talk to another general as just like he would talk to a junior enlisted soldier. Hey, how are you doing? What do you need? What more can I do for you? What else can I do to cause you to be successful in what you do? And so that combination was certainly on display during that initial invasion. And also the things that he, as a chairman, providing advice to the Secretary of Defense, to the president, saw as requirements in order for that mission to be successful. And there you saw the beginnings of the quote-unquote the Powell Doctrine, which is this notion of overwhelming force. If we're going to go into something, then let there be no doubt that we are resourced, equipped, capable enough with a force sufficient enough to get the job done. And that was clearly a part of his leadership and how he presented these things to both the Secretary of Defense as well as to the president. And as he was talking to his field commanders, in this case, General Norman Schwarzkopf, make sure, hey, okay, this is what you're gonna do. You got enough to do it. Is everything there? And so that was all part and parcel to it. And then clearly the other part of his doctrine that's it's so well known is the notion of, now, if we're gonna go in and do this, then make sure we got a plan to lead it, to come out of it. And so so those two things, I think, are the centerpiece or the goalposts of what he would think. Go in with it. First of all, we don't make this our first resort. And the use of force is our final resort after all other things have failed. But if we make a decision to go, then go with all the force that we need to get the job done. Let there be no doubt. And then once we get the job done, make sure we have a plan to extricate, to get out.
Yes. No, thank you for sharing that. So tell me, obviously his legacy as a soldier, warrior, general is quite remarkable. Then obviously he became Secretary of State. What's your sort of assessment of how well he did that particular job, sir? Is it on par with his soldiering skills, would you say?
Well, right. I obviously am not qualified to provide much commentary on how he did as Secretary of State. But there are two things I will say about it. He brought to that position some of the very things that made him so successful as a soldier leader, caring for people. He went to that office, and obviously knowing that I'm now a civilian, and these civilians work on me, but those were still people. They were still people that had a job to do that was important in his eyes. So he would convey that and know in certain terms to them in a very personal way. In many instances, walking around the Department of State, popping in on offices, dropping in unexpectedly. That this notion that everyone, and I was a bit of the same way, I must say. I mean, everything wasn't on a schedule. Some things you did because, hey, I got a feeling right now that I just need to go do this. And you just went and did it. And especially when it dealt with people, getting something from who you were. The desk officers, the story goes, when you went to a briefing there, he didn't want to have a lot of folks, layers removed from the person doing the work, provide the briefing. Bring the person in here to talk to me about this who understands it the best. And oftentimes that was the desk officers or the junior officers who would study the detail, prepared the paper, so that if he had questions, he was getting it directly from them. And that just increased their confidence as well. So when it comes to his leadership at the Department of State, the thing that was so critical is how he just lifted the morale of that department in some wonderful ways. And I would hear about that even in my subsequent years when I was a general and in assignments where I was dealing very closely with members of the Department of State. In my assignments, still talking about the type of leader that General Powell was with respect to how he treated them, respected them for who they were, and caused them to be more successful because they knew that, hey, we're working for a man here who cares about us.
Yes. No, again, thank you for that, Kip. So I'm not going to keep you much longer, but I did want to ask, it's interesting in talking about and reading about, hearing the stories about General Powell. And I was sort of struck by how some of the newspaper articles and the reporters would lead off by saying, General Powell, great warrior, statesman. However, his reputation will be stained because of his presentation of misleading information at the United Nations in terms of weapons of mass destruction. Do you think that's fair, sir?
The short answer to me is absolutely not. You have a soldier, a secretary who's part of a team, who has a role to play, a job to do, being obviously on the team there with the president, et cetera, trusting others around him to provide to him information that is accurate. You have a man who relied on that. Now he will clearly say, and as he has said, yep, I had bad information. But the fact he owned up to that, he didn't push it off on anyone else. He said, yep, I made those statements. I had bad information, but it was something that had I known differently, had information been different, I would not have done. And in my mind's eye, the fact that someone has, because none of us, we are not perfect persons. There's been one perfect man to walk this earth. And that was over 2,000 years ago. And so we're not perfect. But when you have the integrity, the character, yeah, I made a mistake, and this is what happened. I wish it didn't happen, but it did. I own up to it. The fact that we live in a society that we allow that to sully a reputation as absolutely unblemished otherwise, in my mind's eye, is wrong. And none of us who know him, respect him, would ever use something like that to think of him any less. And so to me, the fact that those who say that, it ought not be said, because it's just not true. It's said for reasons other than legitimate ones.
No, I agree with you 100%. So no, thank you for sharing that. So last couple of questions, Kip. What do you think? Two things. One, what is General Colin Powell's legacy? And what do you think his import to young people, especially young kids of color? So what's his legacy and his importance to young people?
I think his legacy is one that lives in many of us who knew him. That's a legacy of caring, the fact that he existed and that we were able to witness his example, to watch him do what he did in myriad assignments, in uniform and out of uniform, to achieve that as the child of immigrant parents, as he says, a product of public education, wasn't the best student, but enjoyed what he did, was focused on what he did, and dedicated himself to serving others, to doing his job to make the team's effort a bit better. And that is an example and a legacy that I believe is carried by so many others, certainly myself and those who I know who knew him, because that is a legacy. And as long as we are around, that will continue to be the case. Mm-hmm. And the good news is he shared that. He shared that not just with folks in uniform, but also with others, with children, youngsters, especially minority, poor kids who may be considered less advantaged, but to let them know that, hey, buddy, you can do this. You stick to it, you make your mind up to it. And he would give that message. Earlier this year, we had a rocks seminar where General Powell spent almost 3 hours just talking about experiences, his stories. And those young kids were just taking it in like chocolate ice cream on a Sunday afternoon. I mean, they were just absorbing everything that he was saying.
Yeah.
And that spirit that he produced in people lives on. That's his legacy. Clearly, we all mourn his death. We certainly send our deepest condolences to Alma and his kids and grandkids. We know that they are going through some terrible, terrible times here of grief, as really most of us are, many of us are. Those who knew him, we know that we've lost someone who won't be replaced. He is a 1 in 100 years personality to cross our pathway. And we recognize that, and we appreciate that, and it won't go away. And so he will be with us. His legacy is who he was as a man, who he was as a father, a husband, a soldier, but importantly, as a fellow human being who treated you just as I would like to be treated, with respect and dignity, because your station in life is just as important as anyone else's.
Yes.
And folks who were around him picked that up, and that's his legacy. I mean, you hear the notion, folks won't remember what you said, but they'll remember how you made them feel. Yeah. Colin Powell made folks feel good. And I think that that legacy of his will be there. And as long as those of us are around who were in his presence and made to feel good, he lives on.
Thank you, General Ward. It's always, again, an honor and a privilege to get a chance to talk to you, and certainly reflecting on the life and the influence of this remarkable person. Thank you so very much, and I look forward to talking to you again sometime very soon.
Sounds good, Adam. One of the things that I recall, and it hadn't dawned on me until General Powell brought it up, but when I had gotten confirmed and became the first commander of U.S. Africa Command, he obviously was out of service and out of uniform, and whatnot. And at one of our meetings that senior folks would from time to time have here in the D.C. area, he came up to me and talking to my wife and I, he and Alma, and saying, Kip, you're the first. Obviously he was the first Black of many things. Obviously, National Security Advisor, Chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff, highest ranking military man, Secretary of State. He said, Kip, you're the first Black combatant commander in the Department of Defense. And that just hadn't dawned on me until he mentioned it.
Yeah.
And so, and it was the type of thing that he would do and say to let you know that your life, what you do, is meaningful. And it would be the same thing if a young private on an M88 and go up to him and say, hey, your M88 is the best M88 in this outfit. M88 is a heavy recovery vehicle, as an example, or helicopter, or whatever. Mm-hmm. But if he would very freely let you know that what you're doing matters and makes a difference and is impactful.
Again, thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I appreciate you taking the time. And, I've kept you. Thank you so much, General Ward. Again, it's always a privilege to talk to you, sir.
Thanks, Adam. Appreciate it, and look forward to being in touch. And we'll keep in touch, my friend. Best to your family, and God bless, sir.
This is the Black Experience for all. Please consider clicking on the join button to support our nonprofit. I'm Adam P. Kennedy. Thank you for joining us.